Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And this is actually not my first time here at Shalom giving the message. If those might remember me, back in the 1990s, I was here as well when I was a representative of the Indiana-Michigan Mennonite Conference Damascus Road team. As Zenaba mentioned, my name is Daniel Grimes, but my full name, the one that's on the birth certificate, is Daniel Baynard Grimes. I am the son of Asa Leroy Grimes Sr. and Florence Baynard Grimes, each of whom was born in Philadelphia. Asa, my father, is the son of Fred Grimes and Althea Lloyd Grimes, each of whom was born in the town of Tar Heel, North Carolina. And even though Tar Heel is a model for North Carolina, it is actually a place name. So they were from the small rural community of Tar Heel. And Fred Grimes, my grandfather, is the son of Judy Grimes Purdy and Asa Purdy, his stepfather. Each of them were born free in Tar Heel, North Carolina as well. And then Judy is the daughter of Archie Grimes I and Eliza Singletary Grimes, each of whom was born enslaved in North Carolina. And Archie is the son of Rhoda Hodge and Luther Hodge, his stepfather, each of whom were born enslaved in North Carolina. However, Archie's biological father is James Wesley Grimes, the plantation master. My mother, Florence Baynard Grimes, is the daughter of Walter Harrison Baynard, excuse me, and Beatrice Snowden Baynard, each who were born free, Walter in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, and Beatrice in Montgomery County, Maryland. And if I were to tell you stories about my maternal grandmother's line, the Snowden family, it would include stories of children being sold away from their mothers, but would also include stories of free people of color who were shipbuilders in the Port of Baltimore, as well as middle-class professionals. And it would also include stories of intersections with Quakers. And my maternal grandfather, Walter Baynard, is the son of Warren and Sarah Baynard, each of whom was born enslaved in Maryland, family details unknown. Now, if you were listening closely, you would have picked up on the fact that I have grandparents and great-grandparents who are the children of slaves. So it's not that many generations removed. So often you will see, I shouldn't say often, but sometimes you will see in newspapers 5-generation pictures. So if I was in a 5-generation family picture, the oldest individuals in that photo would be the formerly enslaved. So depending on which side of the family you trace my lineage, I'm either 3 or 4 generations removed from slavery, which also would mean if you did a 5-generation picture, my children could actually be in the photo with the formerly enslaved. So it's not exactly ancient history. But the story of American history and slavery is difficult to tell sometimes, and it can be heart-wrenching. But it's stories that we must tell, things that we must remember. For instance, on my paternal line, Rhoda Hodge, young Rhoda Hodge, was raped and impregnated by a man who, based on U.S. law, was her owner. And she gave birth to my great-grandfather at the tender age of 16. However, documents written by the slave master's family note that he was regarded as a kind and generous master. Kind and generous master. Yet, he not only raped a teenage girl, he subsequently sold her to a different plantation when my great-grandfather Archie was a small child. Archie's story is only one of the 16 stories I could tell about my great-grandparents. Each of the known stories, I emphasize known stories, is difficult and a little messy. I was given rather wide latitude this morning when I asked to speak here this morning. It's Black History Month. I was told to talk about something related to racism, white privilege, and its connection to the church. For me, Black History Month, and it was actually only a week when I was a child, so it was Black History Week, not Black History Month. It's really about telling the stories of life for African Americans with all of its complexities. And as a child, during Black History Week, we were often told the stories of heroes, and sometimes sheroes, about their perseverance and their dedication, overcoming obstacles, and going on to do great things. However, each African American family, although we share a lot of things in common, we have encountered some of the same things, each family story is unique. We all have different stories to tell. But you cannot talk about Black history without talking about racism when it's in the American context. Even the stories of the church contain racist stories. Therefore, I decided that I should tell my family story. It is, history, right? And so, as a Black man in America with deep Anabaptist roots, at least for African Americans. The circle of Black Mennonites is rather small, and I'm not aware of anyone in my generation whose Mennonite roots go back 2 generations before them. So I think that I can speak with some authority what it feels like to be Black and Mennonite. Generationally, my maternal line, we have been Mennonites as long as we've been free. And so today, I want to share a few stories with the limited amount of time I have, in the hopes of closing the gap or providing you with some information about one African American's family's journey. Now, you may be asking yourself, why is genealogy important? What's so great about family stories? Well, according to Maya Angelou, if you don't know where you're from, you don't know where you're going. So you could say, I think it's easy to conclude that if you don't know who you are until you know where you're from. And as the gospel writer in the passage that was read this morning, he clearly felt that genealogy was an important thing to describe when telling the good news. So he included as part of the good news, you got to tell the genealogy. And I think it still matters today because our genealogy and our family stories help inform us of who we are as individuals. And it should provide us with a certain sense of belongingness and rootedness, but not always. Given that next year marks the 500th anniversary of the Anabaptist movement, there will be lots of focus placed on telling the stories of the past, including genealogy. And I have a former colleague at ANBS who recently completed a mini Anabaptist family history tour, where she visited sites where her ancestors lived, places they worked, the structures they got married in, where they went to the market, the roads they walked upon, and their grave sites. And I find it a little amazing, and actually, to be honest, a little envious of people who are able to go back to the old country of centuries past and see where the ancestors actually inhabited a space and understand that. But that's not my story, and it's not the overwhelming story of majority of American descendants of slaves. It's difficult for us to go back and trace our history to a particular African ancestor or a particular place in Africa. So the mini-series Roots is really kind of an aberration. Most African Americans are only able to go back for most of your family lineage to the time of the Civil War. So Roots is not the norm, it's really kind of the exception for most African American families. Now, I also do want to apologize up front if the topic of genealogy is sensitive for you or if it's triggering. And if you're adopted, I hope you can focus on the fact that you were chosen and wanted by your adopted family and the unselfish love it took that allowed you to be grafted into a family that is truly yours. Now, I've explained some of the messiness of my family lineage, but Jesus' family lineage was also quite messy as well. If you think about each person mentioned in the Matthew chapters, verses 1 through 6 that was read this morning, you can't overlook how messy the lineage of Jesus is. For a distinguished Jewish family, there are a lot of non-Jews and unorthodox conjugal unions in that family. There are indiscretions that include rape, incest, prostitution, and murder. And they're all in the Bible. Tamar was a princess of Israel, but yet she was raped by her half-brother. Rahab was a Canaanite, a foreigner, prostitute. Ruth was a Moabite, a woman who married a Judean immigrant named Mahlon, and upon his death, she became a childless widow who followed her mother-in-law, Naomi, back to Judah. Then she later married another good Jewish boy and had a son named Obed. King David committed adultery with a married woman named Bathsheba, who subsequently became pregnant, and after learning of her pregnancy, he intentionally sent her husband, Uriah, to the front lines of the battlefield so that he could be killed. So David was a murderer. With all of this intermarriage in the Jewish bloodline was watered down, making the chief characters of many of our Bible stories less ethnically Jewish than one might think. But did it really make them any less Jewish? I don't think so. In fact, one could argue that the messiness of their family line and the struggles or the shame that they carried made them stronger, more resilient, and better individuals. This is the lineage of Jesus, the one we worship and follow. Yet, in spite of the messiness of his family lineage, Jesus is the one who leads us forward on the pathway toward wholeness with God. And for me, the Jeremiah passage that was read, chapter 17, verses 7 to 8, I think it connects really nicely with genealogy, since by knowing your family roots, including the struggles, is another way to ground yourself in the here and now. Yes, we do need to trust in the Lord, but I think we're also better able to stand if we understand ourselves and are firmly rooted and have a positive self-identity, which in part comes from being anchored into a family, especially a loving and healthy family. Being firmly rooted and knowing who you are will help allow you to make it through whatever adversities come into your life. I think to at least some degree, the stories in the Bible, especially the stories of the Israelite enslavement, their captivity, and eventual freedom into the promised land, whether in the here and now or in the life thereafter, resonated with my enslaved African ancestors, which made it easier for them to adapt to the new spirituality of the new religion that was given to them after being stripped of all they formerly knew and understood. For me, it's that rootedness that truly matters. Like all humanity, we Africans were already spiritual in nature and believed in the divine. After being forcibly uprooted, we never lost our belief in the creator of the universe. It simply took on different ways of being manifested. Traditional gospel music or worship in African American churches reflect a part of our spirituality that was not lost during the Middle Passage as we came across the deep waters. The ability to form new families, like my great-grandfather Archie, when forcibly separated from your biological families, is a significant accomplishment. Think about the pain and the sorrow of not knowing whether your mother, your father, your sisters, your brothers, your aunties, your cousins would be with you next year or even next week. Because at any time, the slave master could choose to sell anyone off at any time. This is the American history that so many people don't want to talk about, but that we should. And it's not ancient history. Now, when it comes to the church, we are not unscathed, not even in the Mennonite church. So let me just share a few examples from my family's journey. My maternal grandparents, the Baynard side of the family, they knew how to color outside the lines. I wish I knew more about why they decided to join the Mennonite church in the 1930s, but it's somewhat of a mystery to me. However, the choices they made clearly impacted my life. After moving to Philadelphia at the turn of the 19th century, in the part of the Great Migration North, my maternal grandparents, Walter and Beatrice Baynard, returned to their rural roots and purchased a farm that was just shy of 100 acres in rural southeast portion of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And although my mother was born in Philadelphia, they moved back out to the country when she was a small child, so she basically was raised in Lancaster County. Now, historically, the southern tier of Pennsylvania has, just north of the Mason-Dixon line, contains numerous African-American communities. So my maternal grandparents had black neighbors. There were black congregations. They were not the only black folk in the community. There were many others. However, they chose to join Andrews Bridge Mennonite Church and adopted plain dress and the other trappings of Lancaster County Mennonites. And I remember as a small child asking my mother, "Why are we Mennonite?" And the answer she gave was always the same: because Mennonites are people of the book, the Bible. My maternal grandparents must have experienced these strange white people in positive and helpful ways as they moved into a new community in Lancaster County and discovered new ways of doing things. They saw them as being different from the other white folk they knew and they encountered. The Mennonites, at least for my maternal grandparents, understood the Bible and lived out its teachings. Now, that doesn't mean that it didn't come at some personal cost. After all, they joined the Mennonite church. When they joined the Mennonite church, they had to alter their lifestyles by taking on plain clothing, think cape dresses and coverings. They had to take off their jewelry, even their wedding bands, and they had to conform to Lancaster County customs of the time. Now, when our oldest child, Charity Bauman, was a small child, while visiting an elderly relative, she told us a story that when she, along with her mother and other Maryland relatives, went to Lancaster County to visit my maternal grandparents on their farm, that they stayed in the car when they arrived at their house, and they refused to go in the house. Now, they refused to go into my grandparents' home because my grandparents were entertaining some Mennonite friends when they arrived, white Mennonites. My maternal grandmother's sister, niece, and other relatives refused to be under the same roof as white people, the enemy. The enemy was the term that my elderly relative used to describe how they felt about white people at the time they visited my maternal grandparents. It was America in black and white. It was how the world, the white world, viewed them each and every day of their lives. Racist America making it clear that we are not equal and that black folk are somehow less than. Now, often wonder how my grandparents managed their two realities. And I think of the Jeremiah passage and think that they were firmly planted like the tree by the water, and they knew who they were and whose they were and did not fear. Lest you think everything was wonderful for black folk who joined the Mennonite church, think again. My plain dressing mother with the head covering wanted to go to Eastern Mennonite College, but like all schools in Virginia in the 1940s, Eastern Mennonite College had a no blacks policy. The bishop visited my mother's home and told her she could try, emphasize try, to go to Goshen College instead, which she did, and she was one of the first African Americans to be enrolled at Goshen College. And no, all of her experiences at Goshen were not without incident. Now, when it came time for me to go to college, my parents sat me down and they told me they thought it would be best if I went to one of our colleges, meaning Mennonite. Now, I had applied to several different schools. I received my financial aid packages. I even had a full ride scholarship to a well-respected college. And actually, when I went on that campus visit, the director of admissions actually picked me up at the airport to bring me to college. Told me I could use his phone anytime I wanted to call home, before cell phones, remember. So they were I was being actively recruited by other schools. But I turned down a full ride scholarship from a well-respected school, and I borrowed money to go to EMC. I think that's a little ironic. But my experiences were not all rosy either. There were some rough patches during my tenure at Eastern Mennonite. And I experienced racism, but racism in some very new and unique ways. But overall, I had a positive experience during my undergraduate college years. And I'm currently the vice chair of the Eastern Mennonite University Alumni Council. Now, I could go on with more stories about my life and the life of the ancestors, but I think what's most important is that I hope I piqued your interest in genealogy just a little bit and family stories, because all of our family stories are different, especially those family stories from people who are different from us racially, ethnically, or from different religious backgrounds. I mean, we all have a story to tell. So in closing, I just want to leave you with a few questions to ponder. How has the faith of your ancestors influenced your personal faith story and what you believe? What stories have been intentionally buried or forgotten, and why? What stories are you choosing not to share with the next generation? What stories need to be elevated? And how do family stories inform the present or assist in forming our overall worldview? And what stories are we leaving for those who will come after us? I guess, like my ancestors, my roots were planted by the water and received the nourishment to grow and are deep enough to withstand the storms, the floods, and whatever adversities come my way, since I'm still standing, and I'm still standing as part of the Mennonite Church. My prayer is that we will honor the past we should never forget, and that we will strive to make the pathway smoother for those traveling alongside us and in our wake.